Okay, so you want to buy a castle. Find a listing in France or Scotland. Notice that the price is somehow lower than a two-bedroom apartment in a city you'd actually want to live in. Wire the money and wake up as the owner of 800 years of stone. Turrets against a grey sky, a gravel drive under an avenue of limes, a hall with a fireplace you could park a car in, and a staircase that 400 years of hands have worn into a curve. Your name on the deed of a building that has outlived every government that ever taxed it. And the strangest part is that the number on the listing is real. Castles genuinely do sell for less than parking spaces in Manhattan. Italian towns sell them for €1. None of that is wrong. All of it is beside the point. The purchase price of a castle is not the cost of a castle. It is the entry fee to a cost structure, and the reason these buildings are cheap is the same reason they are cheap to give away. The price is set by what the next owner will have to spend, and the market has already done that math, even if you haven't. Let's start with what you think you're buying. You think you're buying a building. What you're actually buying is a position in a queue of obligations that have been accumulating since the last owner ran out of money. And the market prices that with brutal accuracy. When you see a chateau in the Dordogne listed at $900,000 with 30 rooms and 40 acres, you are not looking at a bargain that nobody noticed. You're looking at a building where the deferred work is worth more than the asking price. Every serious buyer who walked through it before you got a report added up the roof, the frames, the wiring, the damp, and the tower that has been scaffolded for 6 years and walked away. The price fell until it reached someone who hadn't added it up. That is the market working correctly. Here is the general rule, and it holds from Scotland to Tuscany. The price of a historic building moves inversely to the obligation attached to it. A castle that is dry, wired, heated, and licensed to trade is not cheap at all. It costs what a good hotel costs because it is one. A castle at a shockingly low number is cheap because the roof is at the end of its life, and the person selling it knows exactly what the next 15 years cost. The €1 listings make this explicit, and they are worth understanding because they are the honest version of the whole asset class. Italian and Sicilian towns really do sell derelict houses and small fortified properties for a single euro. What you sign is not a purchase, it is a contract. You post a bond, often €5,000, and you commit to completing a restoration inside 3 years to a standard the municipality sets using approved methods. Fail, and you forfeit the bond and the building. The euro is not the price. The mandatory spend is the price, and the euro is a rounding error on a $400,000 renovation you have legally agreed to perform on a schedule you did not write. Every castle transaction is that transaction. Some of them just hide it better. Now, the financing, which is short because there mostly isn't any. The building is poor collateral for a reason that surprises people. In a forced sale, the bank inherits everything you were about to inherit. They would be repossessing a liability with a roof on it. So, the market is cash or a specialist lender at a rate 2 to 4 points above a normal mortgage or a facility secured against the farmland rather than the castle standing on it. Which tells you something important early. The lender is willing to lend against the fields. It is not willing to lend against the fortress. The people whose entire profession is valuing risk have already decided which part of this estate is the asset. Now here's where it gets interesting, because the moment the deed changes hands, you discover you don't actually control the thing you bought. Almost every castle worth owning is protected. In England, it's a listing, grade 1 or grade 2 star. In France, it's classé or inscrit at the Monuments Historiques. In Italy, there's a vincolo from the Soprintendenza. The label varies, the mechanism doesn't. Protection means the fabric of the building is no longer yours to change, not the windows, Not the roof covering, not the internal plaster, the staircase, the chimney pieces, or in many cases, the color you paint the front door. People hear that and imagine a bureaucratic inconvenience. It isn't an inconvenience, it's a cost structure, because once the fabric is protected, you no longer buy repairs on a competitive market. You buy permission first, and then you buy a specific repair, executed a specific way by a short list of contractors qualified to do it. The lime mortar has to be lime, mixed to a specification, because Portland cement is harder than the medieval stone around it, traps water inside the wall, and pushes the moisture out through the face of the stone, which then spalls off in the first hard frost. That isn't heritage sentiment. Half the ruined masonry in Europe is post-war repointing doing exactly that, slowly, for 60 years. The rules exist because the cheap version destroys the building, but knowing why the rule is right doesn't reduce your invoice. So the cost of your work is set by a regulator, not by a market. In France, a Class A building requires the involvement of an architecte en chef des monuments historiques for significant work. In Britain, a serious project needs a conservation-accredited architect and a structural engineer who works in historic fabric, and the professional fees on a heritage repair run 12 to 18% of the build cost, against 6 to 8% on ordinary construction. On a $1 million roof, that's roughly $90,000 of extra fees to purchase the right to spend the $1 million. You're not shopping for a builder, you're shopping for consent, and consent has a price list. Which brings you to the roof, because in the end, a castle is a roof problem wearing a castle costume. Think about the geometry. A large house has 2,000 square feet of roof. A modest chateau has 15,000 to 25,000 square feet of it in slate or handmade tile or lead, cut into valleys and dormers and tower cones, every one of which is a joint, and every joint is where water gets in. A full re-roof in conservation-grade slate with new LED flashings runs $30 to $60 a square foot installed. Do that arithmetic honestly on 18,000 square feet, and you are between $540,000 and just over $1 million on a building you bought for $900,000. And that number is the easy part, because before anybody touches a single slate, you have to get up there. Access is the hidden majority of the cost of high-level work. Scaffolding a full elevation of a 4-story tower with a temporary roof over the top so the work can continue through rain is not a purchase, it's a rental. You pay to erect it, you pay a weekly hire charge for every week it stands, and you pay to take it down. On a tower that's $100,000 to $200,000 before a mason has been paid for an hour of work, which produces the single most counterintuitive line in the entire economics of this building. The cost of a repair is driven by its height, not its size. Replacing 4 square feet of decayed stone at ground level is a day's work for one mason. The same 4 square feet, 80 feet up on a turret, is a $140,000 project, and $130,000 of that is the privilege of standing next to the problem. That structure has a second, worse consequence. Once the scaffold is up, the meter is running on the calendar, not on the work. A delay costs you the same whether it's caused by weather, a subcontractor, a supply problem, or the planning officer wanting a different mortar mix. Every week of argument is a week of hire, which is why heritage projects overrun so violently. The thing you're renting isn't labor, it's time. And now, the bats. This sounds like a joke, and it is not. Across Britain and the EU, bats and their roosts are protected by law, and old roof voids are exactly what bats want. If a survey finds a maternity roost in your attic, you cannot work in that roof during the breeding season. You fund the ecology survey, you fund the mitigation, sometimes you fund construction of an alternative roost, and you work inside a window of a few months a year. A single colony can push a roof phase back a full year. The scaffold either comes down and goes back up, which you pay for twice, or it stands there through the winter, which you also pay for. Your project schedule is set by an animal that pays no rent. So, the shell is expensive. Now, here's the other side of the ledger, and it runs continuously whether you're there or not. Heat. A castle is not priced by floor area. It's paid for by volume, and the volume is enormous. 20-foot ceilings, halls, stairwells that behave like chimneys, and walls 3 feet thick that hold cold like a battery. Solid stone has huge thermal mass and almost no insulating value, which is the worst possible combination. It takes a fortnight of continuous firing to warm through, and it dumps that heat straight back out through the stone. A mid-sized chateau burns 6,000 to 10,000 gallons of heating oil a year. At current prices, that is $30,000 to $50,000 annually to keep a building above the dew point in which you personally occupy 4 rooms. The obvious answer is insulation. The obvious answer is illegal. You cannot dry line the walls because the plaster is protected and because sealing a solid wall with a modern vapor barrier traps moisture inside the masonry and rots the embedded oak beam ends. You usually cannot fit double glazing because the glass and the frames are part of what's listed. You cannot insulate the roof void the way a modern building does because it changes how the structure breathes and, again, because of the bats. Sit with that because it's the cleanest example of the whole ownership problem. The law requires you to keep the building in good repair. The same law forbids the modifications that would make keeping it cheaper. You are legally required to be inefficient and then build for the inefficiency every month for as long as you own it. Then the grounds, which people assume are decorative. The grounds are a payroll. 40 acres of parkland is a full-time job, and a mature avenue of trees is not scenery. It is a liability register. Every tree needs an arboricultural inspection on a cycle, because a limb dropping on a visitor is a claim against you personally. If there's a moat, it silts, and dredging one is a specialist excavation alongside a medieval retaining wall that must not be undermined. A wet moat that stops being maintained doesn't become a dry moat. It becomes a hydrostatic problem pressing on foundations designed in 1340. And now insurance, where the numbers stop being intuitive, you cannot insure this building for what you paid. Insurance pays reinstatement, and reinstatement means putting it back the way the law requires, in the same materials, by the same methods, with the same consents. Your $900,000 chateau has a reinstatement figure of $8 to $15 million, because that's genuinely what it would cost to rebuild it in cut stone and oak and handmade tile with a conservation architect supervising. The premium is calculated off that number, not off the price you paid. So you are paying an annual premium against a valuation an order of magnitude above your purchase price on a building with no fire compartmentation, no sprinklers, and 100 feet of original oak roof structure that has been drying since the reign of Louis XIV. The premium hurts, so owners do the natural thing and declare a lower value. This is the trap almost nobody sees coming, and it is buried in the wording. Historic property policies carry an average clause. If you insure the building for half its reinstatement cost, the insurer treats you as your own co-insurer for the other half, and every claim is scaled by the same proportion, not just total losses. A $200,000 fire in one wing on a building underinsured by 50% pays $100,000. You did not buy a cheaper policy. You bought a policy that pays half of every claim you will ever make, forever. And you'll find that out on the worst day you have. Add the metal. Lead roofs and lead flashings get stolen for scrap, and after a decade of that epidemic, most heritage insurers cap metal theft claims outright, often at a few $1,000s, sometimes excluding it entirely unless you've installed approved roof alarms. Your listing consent requires the replacement to be lead. Your policy will contribute almost nothing toward it. The gap between what the law makes you install and what the insurer will replace is a permanent open position, and you are on the wrong side of it. So far, the castle sounds like a machine for consuming money. It is, which raises the only interesting question left. Where does any money come from? Start by deleting the assumption. It does not come from the gate. Public admission looks like the answer and almost never is. A well-run regional castle might do 25,000 visitors a year at $15, which is $375,000 of gross ticket revenue, and sounds like a business. Then you open it. Public access triggers a fire strategy, escape routes, a public liability position, accessible toilets, a compliant route for wheelchair users, staffed rooms for security, an admissions desk, retail stock, and cleaning. Guides and front of house on a seasonal rota run $150,000 to $200,000. Utilities, cost of goods, marketing, and compliance take another chunk. Run competently, the visitor operation converts a $375,000 top line into something between break-even and $60,000 of contribution, and only if the weather cooperates across a season 5 months long. It also carries a cost the spreadsheet never shows. 25,000 people a year, walking a 1600s oak floor, touching the same handrail, breathing humidity into rooms with original wall coverings. Your customers are an erosion mechanism. The gate money is partly just rent. You charge the public for accelerating your own repair cycle. The real money, where there is any, comes from 3 places, and they have nothing to do with history. The first is events. A castle with a wedding license is a venue business, and venue hire for a full weekend runs $8,000 to $30,000, depending on country and calendar. 30 of those is real money. But look closely at what you're actually selling, because it isn't a building. It's a specific Saturday in June. Nobody gets married on a wet Tuesday in February. So your entire annual revenue is compressed into a set of dates you can count on 2 hands. Every competitor within 100 miles is bidding for the same dates, and a single bad review during your 15 best weekends does more damage than a leaking tower. To get there, you also need a commercial kitchen, licensed bar, accessible bathrooms, parking for 150 cars, and a fire strategy for a crowd, every one of which requires listed building consent to install inside protected fabric. It's routine for the compliance work required to open the wedding business to cost more than the wedding business earns for the first 4 years. The second is film and television, the best money per day on the estate and the least controllable. A location fee of $8,000 to $20,000 a day for a building you were heating anyway is close to pure margin. It is also dependent on a production designer in another country picking your silhouette over 11 others. You cannot build a business on it, you can only be ready for it, which mostly means owning a driveway a lighting truck can get down. The third is accommodation, and it's the most reliable of the 3. The wings converted to holiday lets, the gatehouse, the coach house, the estate cottages, boring, unphotogenic, and it produces the closest thing this asset has to recurring revenue. Notice what all 3 have in common. None of them is the castle. They're businesses conducted in the vicinity of a castle, and the castle's contribution is atmosphere. Now here's the structural trap, the one that determines whether any of this works over 20 years, and it has nothing to do with any single line item. Your costs and your revenues inflate at different rates. Conservation work is skilled hand labor in trades that are shrinking. There are a few hundred qualified banker masons and lead workers in a country the size of Britain. Their average age keeps rising, and training, one takes years. Demand for their time is set by cathedrals, national institutions, and government-funded programs with deep pockets. That labor cost compounds well above general inflation, year after year, because supply cannot expand. Meanwhile, your revenue is wedding hire and admission tickets, priced against a local competitive market that will not absorb 7% increases annually because the couple can hire a barn instead. Run that gap over 2 decades and it doesn't matter how well you run the estate. Your cost base is indexed to a shortage of masons. Your revenue is indexed to what an ordinary family will pay for a nice afternoon. The scissors close slowly and they close on everyone. The tax code makes it worse, and this deserves stating plainly because it's absurd and it is real. In the UK, building a brand new house is 0 rated for VAT. Repairing a listed one is charged at the standard 20%. The relief for approved alterations to listed buildings was abolished in 2012. So, on that $1 million conservation roof, the government adds $200,000 in tax on work you are legally compelled to perform in the manner the state itself specifies on a building the state has designated as nationally important. The tax system pays you to demolish and charges you to preserve. There are grants, and they don't work the way people assume. Heritage grants are match-funded and paid in arrears. You spend first, you evidence it, and you claim it back. So, a $500,000 grant requires you to have roughly $500,000 of your own money, plus the working capital to float the grant portion for months before reimbursement. Plus, the accredited professional fees to satisfy the conditions. Grants don't fund poor owners. They multiply the money of owners who already had money, which is exactly why the estates that survive are the ones that were already solvent. Which brings us to how these buildings actually die, because it isn't dramatic. Castles don't die in fires. They die in phases that don't get funded. Here is the sequence, and it's the same everywhere. Owner runs a costed conservation plan across the building in phases. Phase 1, the South Range, goes fine. Phase 2 comes in 40% over because of